my intelligent friends, welcome back to Tea and Lit. In today's video, we are going to be doing our introduction to 1984 by George Orwell, which is our November read. So grab yourselves a cuppa. Nope. Grab yourselves a cuppa and a copy, and let's get into it. Before we get started, I want to say thank you to my friend Erica, who made me this t-shirt. I don't know if you can see it, but it says it's a t-shirt. She made this for me for my birthday, and I'm very grateful. So I just want to say thank you, Erica. If you're watching this video, I love my t-shirt. What I don't love is this book. No, just kidding. Today's the introduction. But before we get into it, I do want to say, if you are in any sort of mental health distress, if you are in the middle of an existential crisis or have had one recently, if you have major anxieties about what is to come this November, I would highly discourage you from reading this book because there's a lot going on in here. It's as bad as everybody says it is, and so I just would say, skip this month's reading. With us, at least. Read something. But maybe not this one. We will be doing Beowulf next month, so that hopefully will lighten the mood a little bit. But this book definitely had me jacked up, and we'll be talking more about the review next week. But I did want to give you a warning that if you do not have the mental range, the emotional range to deal with such a severe dystopia, just don't subject yourself to it. There's no need. With all of that said, let's do our introduction for this video. 1984 was written by George Orwell. It's his pseudonym. Eric Arthur Blair is the author's real name. We'll be talking about that in the author spotlight video, which will be coming up after this one. But he wrote this book. It was published on June 8th, 1949. I didn't realize how late in his life that was. And it tells the fictional story of a dystopic world where there's three superpowers and they are at perpetual war with each other, and kind of what it's like to live in one of those countries. Sometimes it's hard for me to keep track because I do film like a bunch of videos at once, and like there's some things that I want to talk about, but which video we talk about it in is kind of important. So our story starts out with our main character introducing us to our main character, whose name is Winston Smith, and he is a member of the Outer Party of Oceania. Basically, he lives in London, and he's not like one of the inside guys in the party, in like the government, but he works for the government. And his job is in the Ministry of Truth, where basically he rewrites history to make the party look good. They have invented all of these wonderful things like airplanes, and they have always been at war with this other country, and they've always been friends with the other country, and basically he writes lies for a living, and it's propaganda. So we've got Oceania, that's where he lives, and Oceania is like the United States and like the British Isles, and then there's Eurasia, which is Russia, and then basically the continent of Europe, and then there's East Asia, which is Asia, like China, Mongolia, Japan, etc., etc., and they've absorbed the whole of Asia. I think Oceania also includes Australia, it said. But basically, it's these three superpowers. So imagine the United States, Russia, and China is basically what it is. And all the other countries of the world are absorbed into one of those three countries. And those three are always at war with each other. Now, like I said, this was written in 1949. George Orwell was born in 1900 something. 1903. So you can see how he had that vision based on his worldview of being in a perpetual state of war. He saw World War I, he saw World War II, he saw the beginning of the Cold War. And so you could see this idea that, these top three countries are in perpetual jostling for dominance for resources and killing people, and what the consequences of that are. So it is a dark book. Winston, has this desire to reject the party, but at the same time it's like such a massive monolith that it's hard to overcome it, and he tries to hold out hope for a brighter future for people like him and for people who are called proles, who are like the lower class people, the people who don't work for the government. And this story basically shares what his life is like as a member of the party, starting to think for himself and starting to reject some of the ideas of the party and putting his hope in a future, and then what he does with that hope to attempt to push against the party. I think that is a fairly good synopsis. So like I said, Winston Smith is our main character. He's like in his late 30s. I think it said he was 38 years old. It takes place in London. Another character is Julia, who is a young woman in her 20s, 26, and they have an affair together. Next up is O'Brien, who is, Julia also works for the Ministry of Truth in the fiction department. So her job is to create fiction that is known to be fiction. Winston's job is to change history, which is basically fiction, but it's considered truth, nonfiction. O'Brien also works in the Ministry of Truth, and Winston has this feeling that O'Brien also doesn't like the party and has some desire to reject the party. So O'Brien turns into kind of a confidant of his. Next is Big Brother, whose eye is on the cover of our book. Big Brother is more simple than a character in this story. Big Brother is kind of like the head of the government almost. Big Brother's not a real person as far as we know, but his face, there's a picture, there's like propaganda posters all over the place of Big Brother, and there's this adulation that's necessary to be a good member of the party for Big Brother. Next is Mr. Carrington, who's like this little shop owner on like the rough part of town. And then last is Emmanuel Goldstein, who is a person that we never actually meet, that is like the head of the opposition party. So the opposition party is like an underground organization, and Emmanuel Goldstein is the head of that, sort of. Hopefully I've described this book. This book, seriously, I'm not even kidding. I cussed so much in my notes for this book. I don't typically cuss that much for notes. There are notes available for this book. Oh, I should mention this before I forgot. There are notes for this book. There are no merch items for this book because it's still under copyright, even though George Orwell has been dead since 1950, or more correctly, Eric Blair has been dead since 1950. If you live in Canada or Australia, it is in the public domain there, so you should probably make some t-shirts because there's some great lines in here. And I think in the EU, it will be in the public domain next year in 2021. The United States, it's not for like a really long time, so there would be no t-shirts with great quotes on them. And by the way, the George Orwell like Foundation or whatever has been known to sue people as late as 2015 who don't even put quotes on the shirts but just have like something inspired by. So yeah, it's kind of a bummer, but whatever. What are you gonna do? You can't fight Big Brother, right? Some of the themes of this story. The first one that stuck out to me a lot was language. So like with all dystopias, they're fiddling with the books. Fiddling with like the great pieces of literature. But the way they fiddle with it is by changing the language itself. So they have this thing called newspeak, where it's like you don't use certain words. So a word like phenomenal would not be used. It would be like super good. It's horrible. And so they've changed the books. That is always like a surefire way of knowing a dystopia, when they change the books or they take away the books. And it just made me think, like, I want to bury books in plastic bags deep underground to ensure that we will always have access to great literature, even in, the inevitable dystopia that we are living through right now. Anyway, so the changing of language, the adaptation, the adoption of newspeak is something that's really interesting to read throughout the story. Another thing is the dangers of totalitarianism, which is sort of obvious. Big Brother and the party are this monolith, and to fight against that is futile, but also they control every aspect of life. And that's not good for anybody, really. The one cool thing that was, not one, but there were several things that were pretty cool, and one of them was the psychological manipulation. In the third act of the book, it's really cool to see how they used, it's cool to see, I shouldn't say that. It is interesting to see how they use torture as a means of mental manipulation. And even throughout the story, they kind of explain it in the third act, but you see bits of it in the first two, where it's like, you know, if you take away people's food, we talked about it with Julius Caesar, actually. What was it? Complacency leads to conspiracy or something? Whatever that was said in Julius Caesar. Comfort leads to conspiracy. You get this idea that they're keeping the people on the edge of starvation and poverty as a means of keeping them controlled. And it is wild. So wild. And then the last one that I wanted to mention was technology. She says that she talks to her phone, and how technology is a tool for Big Brother, for the party, for mental manipulation and fear tactics used via tech. Basically, there's these screens, these telescreens that are in everyone in the party's apartment, and the camera is always on, the screen is always on, and the mic is always on. And so you never get a chance to kind of like, and like explore ideas or read a book or do anything like that, because the camera's always on and the party doesn't want you to have access to certain types of information. So, yeah. We have to be worried about our cameras, all of our technology. My neighbor is mowing his lawn. Hopefully you can't hear it. So those are the themes, the symbols. First of all, Big Brother, I mentioned, as this like overpowering, dominant force that is always watching you, that is always checking to see if you're having thought crimes. You can't even think about stuff. They don't have actual crimes, they have thought crimes. Oh my gosh. One of the things that I wrote down, it says, the knowledge of language was prohibited. Not the teaching of language, but the knowledge of foreign languages was prohibited. So wild. The telescreens is the other thing I had mentioned, that they're always on, they're always watching, they're always singing to you. Always, always, always. And then last one, there's this glass paperweight that Winston seems to put kind of his worldview into this glass paperweight that he purchases like halfway through the book. So this book got me twisted. I finished it last night at like 2 a.m. And as I mentioned, if you are in any sort of existential crisis, if you have any sort of anxieties about what is going to happen on November 3rd, if you have any kind of mental health challenges that you're going through right now, I would strongly discourage you from reading this book in your current state. But when, you know, that time passes, because, you know, any mental health challenge that we have, it comes in waves and then it goes. And if you are not someone who's had that experience yet, hold on, it will. I promise you, as someone who has dealt with mental health, my brother will say the same thing, as someone who has dealt with mental health, the wave comes and the wave goes. I'm going to put the national hotline for suicide prevention on the bottom of this video, just in case. I feel like this is probably a good time to have a mental health talk. Mental health is a very serious issue, and it's real, and you should take care of your mental health just as much as you would take care of your physical health. And this book is not a way to do that. So don't subject yourself to it. But if you are having a difficult time this year, 2020 has been a very rough year for literally everyone across the planet. Don't feel bad. If you are, you know, feeling a little like you're drowning in chaos in the world, don't feel bad. You are not alone. There are a lot of us out there who are having a difficult time. you can call the number on the bottom and they will help you work through the crisis that you're in and to find support moving forward. Because truth be told, we all need a little support. And honestly, we're gonna need support for a little while longer. I'm generally an optimist, but like, I definitely don't think this year is gonna end well. But I have every hope that 2021 will be better. Do I? Is that true? I have every hope that 2030 will be better than 2020. That's what I have hope for. Okay, bye!